Hey everyone, welcome. Happy Tuesday. And tonight we have the next installment of my Leading Change series. My name is Mike Gelman, and I am a leadership and career coach and uh, team facilitator. And one of the things that I've done a lot of in my career was to improve processes and systems and that falls into a number of categories. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit about that tonight with some tips, as well as a mistake or two. I've made many over the years, and hopefully you'll benefit from that. So with regards to change, there's all kinds of changes you might want to implement at a small scale or a big scale. And they could relate to maybe introducing a new software in the organization, like a new technology platform, like Office 365 or something like that. Or it could include, or it could be a process of some sort, right? It could be, for example, in my world, it might be the hiring process, how you attract clients, attract job candidates and hire them and get them onboarded. Or it could be a people-related issue in terms of improving how we work together, right? Changing the way that we make decisions, for example, in your respective team. So there's many different venues for change and endless opportunities for that. I just got off the call not too long ago, a video call with a client who rattled off about 3 changes that she'd like to make in 2021 for her job, and so we often have a lot of ideas about what needs to be changed, but oftentimes there's never the follow through that's needed, or it's implemented really poorly. And I'll share with you, this was early in my career. I was implementing a technology training program. Like, well, the problem that we had was that we had all of these technology training courses on, like, well, we didn't use Microsoft, we used Corel, believe it or not. But we had word processing, spreadsheet classes, kind of dating myself there. We had spreadsheet classes, we had presentation software, we had database and other types of software. And what would happen is, like, we'd guess how many do we need, beginning, intermediate, advanced, of what was needed. We'd throw it on the calendar, and then whoever signs up, signs up. And sometimes we'd have a full class of like 20, 25 people. Other times we'd have like 3 or 4 people sign up and we'd have to cancel it. And so it was this constant challenge of trying to guess, and we just really didn't know. And then what do you do about the people who really need something, but there's not enough for a full class? And so it got expensive because we'd be paying for these classes that would end up being canceled, and you just end up wasting people's time because they would be like a full day class, for example, or a half day class. So I came in, enter Mike, I'm brought in, and this was about 10% of my responsibilities, but it was something that I saw some ways to really improve the way that we registered people for classes, the ways that we offered them and registered people. So I got the idea to assess everyone's skills first, right? Like a good trainer, assess their skills first, so we would know among our employee population how many fell into the beginner, intermediate category. Obviously, if they're advanced, they probably don't need the course, but how many fall into each of those 3 categories? And I worked with a vendor that actually had a way to assess it. And to cut to the chase, we had kind of basically a few days, consecutive days in a row, where had people lined up from everyone, the executives on down to the front line, to take this assessment, right? In this meeting room that was on the other side. This is when I worked at the zoo, and it was the other side of the grounds, as we called them. And I had my office was behind the meerkats. That's kind of not relevant to this story, but it makes me laugh. It's fun. It was a great place. So what happened is that, middle of the morning, after we had a few rounds of people coming through, I started getting these emails saying, like, what exactly is this measuring, this assessment? And long story short, I realized that what the vendor had them going through was not what they had shown me, right? And it was just like, oh my gosh, after all that effort, and I'm the new kid on the block, and they'd never done anything remotely like this before. And I had it all mapped out and working, I thought, beautifully. And so, sometimes these things happen, right? You're trying to create a change and whatnot, and it doesn't go the way you think it should. And so ultimately what ended up happening is we worked out another system, another method where they didn't have to take the assessment, where they could do a little bit of a self-assessment. We'd give them some criteria, and we'd hop on the phone with them to guide them if they weren't sure kind of what level they were at. Because we didn't want to have someone in a advanced class when they should really be in a intermediate or beginner class, for example. It's just a waste of their time, it's a waste of money, all of that, and vice versa. So, that was one example. I'm not giving you all the details of it, but that was a kind of a process that went bad. And of course, I had a lot of cleanup to do after that. At the end of the day, we recovered. I kind of made my apologies. I stopped things mid-course, and we pivoted, but it was definitely a challenge. So what are some things you can do? 5 things that you can do. One is to get the big picture view. Get the big picture view of what the change is. Okay, and why it needs to change. So I had these 2 departments one time. This other organization, I was an internal consultant, and they were there's a program managers that were frustrated that these account executives weren't filling out forms correctly. The account executives, were fudging things because they didn't want the auditors to get on their case. There were auditors, and then there were engineers involved, that needed to verify certain things, or all these different parties. And this was something that was costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost income because I's weren't being dotted and T's weren't being crossed, basically. And so one of the big things that you want to do with a complex issue that touches so many different people directly, obviously the customers it touches, but who does it take in order to bring about that service to a customer, right? And in this case, it was, creating like energy efficient buildings. I can't remember exactly at the moment. So one of the things is to have the big picture view. So what we did is we actually got everybody in the room at the same time. We got all those people, including officers and all of that. Now it takes a lot of planning and a lot of asking around to kind of determine who needs to be in the room. But that helps you to get the big picture view, because with a complicated problem, one person can't possibly know all the different pieces parts, right? If it's a small thing, then you might not need to go to that extreme. Maybe you manage a program and you want to improve a process. So the types of change I am talking about are changes that aren't 100% within your control, or aren't 90% within your control. The types of organizational changes I'm talking about are things that, multiple parties, there's multiple stakeholders, and people have different pieces of it. and different levels of interest in the outcome of that. So a second strategy is defining the expectations that you have for how should it be. So maybe it's something that's cumbersome and it needs to be a lot easier. Maybe it's taking too long and it needs to be a lot quicker. So what are the expectations or the criteria for the new process? You don't have to know what it is yet. You just have to know, like, ideally, what do you want as an outcome, right? It just needs to be easier. It needs to be this or that. So if you do have a clear picture of what the ideal outcome, great. If you just have the criteria, that's fine too. So you just need something that's going to anchor the change. You know where you're starting, kind of what exists currently, right? That big picture and kind of why it exists, and then where you want to ideally get it to, right? And so the third strategy is to really be inclusive. And so I kind of talked about this a little bit, and that is not necessarily having everyone involved at the same time. It might be different stages, it might be representatives, but that's really an important aspect. The next strategy is really to map out the change, right? So that's kind of the roadmap. So how are we going to get there from where we are right now to where we need to be? And in some cases, you're totally going to junk a whole system and put in a new one. But in the technology example I gave initially, like with the Office 365, you might, if you're going from something else, you might keep some of the older versions for a period of time as you layer in the new versions and run them in parallel. Or you might rip off the Band-Aid and totally junk the old one and make a massive effort to quickly get in the new system. So depending on what your organization's constraints are and the culture and the people involved, those are all factors to take into account. I can't give you a black and white answer of what's best. That's not what this is about. You need to do the due diligence and have the right people involved so that you can make a wise choice in terms of your strategy, in terms of your tactics for how you are going to carry out the change, right? And sometimes you're removing things, right? So this one example I was mentioning with the energy efficient buildings, sometimes, once we actually mapped out on a wall all the different steps, and people were just like, holy cow, no wonder why we can't do this right. And they realized there were redundancies, there were parts that were total gaps that nobody was taking care of, but people were assuming maybe that someone else was taking care of it. A lot of people said, oh, I didn't even realize you did all that stuff. Like, people just don't realize. So you want to map out, and a lot of times you might be flow charting it, but you can use sticky notes initially. But basically you're kind of mapping out like all the pieces, parts, and how they should flow through the process from A to Z. Maybe you use drawings, maybe that's or rendering, right? A change. Maybe it's a list, or maybe step by step, or whatever it is. There's different ways that you can accomplish that. The key thing is to have some type of roadmap so that everyone can be on the same page and you've got something to follow. The last strategy is really to experiment. Go in with a mindset of experimentation and iterate. Right? In the IT world, they lean on something nowadays, more so on an agile approach to change, which is making change, introducing something before it's completely done, but getting that immediate feedback as you're going along, so that then you can make improvements, rather than designing things in a vacuum, right, in isolation, and then ta-da, grand opening, and you realize like you overlooked like a few major things or a few major stakeholders, and then you're just like, just up the creek, because maybe it's at that point it's too late to really go back and scrap it. So then you just start patching things. So one of the things is to really just experiment, and then you can revisit it and refine it. And that goes whether it's a technology issue, That goes whether it's a process issue, such as like an order flow for customer orders, or people, for example, is how we're going to make decisions on certain issues as a team, right? And build in that opportunity to revisit it up front. Expect that the change isn't going to go perfect. Just say, okay, you know, in the event that things don't work out the way we anticipate, 9 times out of 10, that's what happens. What do we want the process to be for reconciling that, for getting back together? Like, who calls the meeting? Who's responsible for making the changes or the fixes? What are the limitations of that? Like, what are we willing to do? What are we not willing to do? And even if you can do some scenario planning, all the better, right? And that'll actually help you in the design front. And that's something I actually left out I meant to lead with, is design-centered thinking or customer-centric thinking is a very effective approach to designing something that's going to work for others. So you might have an internal stakeholder, other departments, or might be a paying customer, whatever it is. Kind of like Mod Pizza. I like their model. Kind of like they have to use a Subway model too. But you go into this pizza place and you basically build your own pizza. You tell them what kind of crust you want, and then it's like an assembly line. Like, well, what toppings do you want? It's one price, all the toppings you want. You tell them, and so they build it to order, right? And so it's designed all around the customer, what the customer wants, versus now they do have some or suggested or pre-made type pizzas they offer, and signature pizzas as they call them, but it's designed around you build it yourself, and they have a process, and they have someone does the dough, the pizza dough, and then it gets passed on to someone who has another role, and they're the topping person. So they do the toppings, and sometimes there's a second topping. There's one person that does the meat toppings, and then there's another one that oftentimes would do the veggie toppings, right? And then it goes to the cashier. Or I'm sorry, then it goes in the oven, right? That's someone else's role, and then it goes to the cashier. And so a lot of thought went into that process in terms of what would be the most streamlined process, what will be probably the most motivating for people, what's going to work best for the customer. So all of those things. So it's not just a customer, it has to work for the employees too, right? So that's why it's really important to take that time up front to understand who has a vested interest in the outcome. And there may be cases where you're just not aware of that, so you need to ask around, because other people will say, oh, you should invite so-and-so, they need to be involved. And the degree they need to be involved may vary, right? Some people need to actually be part of building the solution. Others just need to be informed. Others maybe just need veto power. Others need to be able to make decisions. You need them to say yes and approve a budget or something like that. So those are my strategies for you. Get the big picture, define your expectations, be inclusive, map out the change, and experiment, all within the context of keeping your stakeholders, your customers, internally and externally in mind. So hopefully that was helpful. We have one more installment next Tuesday to wrap up the year, and that is evaluating the impact of your change and celebrating successes. So that will be next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific. Please join me for that. And if you missed prior sessions, you can scroll through my feed on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and see all the others in the Leading Change series. I did one on strategic planning that a lot of people seem to like. That was last week, I believe. So check it out. Let me know what you think. Add your own experience and thoughts. I welcome that. And with that, we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.